Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Nearly 4 months to Election Day, and Donald Trump is floating ideas for possible cabinet members, dialing Jamie Dimon, and weighing the risks of dismissing Fed Chair Jay Powell before the end of his term. One of Powell's former co-workers, Eric Rosengren, who ran the Boston Fed, joins us.
That action wouldn't be all that supportive of what either president would probably want in order to achieve a soft landing for the economy.
And Trump is collecting endorsements from Silicon Valley. The information founder Jessica Lessin explains a curious shift to the right among West Coast leaders.
Andreessen, Thiel, Musk, they're sort of libertarian in many ways, but they're ignoring social issues where they may not agree with President Trump.
Plus, President Biden considering a Supreme Court overhaul. And bags? Check. Spirit Airlines is under pressure even with all those extra fees.
So I would never check a bag.
Well, what if you have some type of liquid? I have hair products.
It's Wednesday, July 17th. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin, and here we go. The chip stocks are dragging down the NASDAQ after the Biden administration floated using stronger trade restrictions to crack down on the chip sector in China. Separately, former President Trump said that Taiwan should pay the United States for defense, and we're going to have more of that interview in just a moment. Today's move, though, comes after the Dow soared by 743 points in yesterday's session. That was a gain of over 1.8%. The S&P was up by about 0.6%, and then the NASDAQ was up by 0.2%. The biggest driver for the Dow is a gain of more than 6% for shares of United Health. After upbeat earnings and guidance for that stock, you can check it out. Week to date, up by 7.5%, big part of that jump coming yesterday. And this has been a really interesting move, too, watching small cap stocks. The Russell 2000 small cap index was actually up 3.5% yesterday. That brings its 1 week gains to more than 10%. It's been trading at its highest level since January of 2022. It's still 8% from its all-time high, but this all started last week, this major move, after you got inflation numbers that looked better than anticipated. It's been a big swing from some of the mega cap stocks into the small caps, and they've seriously outperformed over the last week.
Yep. Serious Goldilocks after the good retail sales, and everybody still says it's going to be September, so no one's taken the cutoff, and it's the rotation, the long-awaited rotation, and if it goes to where Tom Lee said it's going to go, he said 40% yesterday, so we got 3.5 yesterday, so we got another 36.5 to go, and what he said was a matter of months.
Yes, yeah, so we'll see. He's been right on a lot of things so far.
SpaceX and ex-owner Elon Musk says he's moving the headquarters of both companies from California to Texas. He vowed to make the moves in response to a new law in California that was signed by Governor Newsom this week that bars school districts from requiring parents to be notified of a child's gender identification change. Musk posted on X, this is the final straw because of this law and the many others that preceded it, attacking both families and companies. SpaceX will now move its headquarters from Hawthorne, California, to Starbase, Texas. Musk recently endorsed former President Trump plans to contribute $45 million a month to a pro-Trump super PAC.
And Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz say that they plan to make significant donations to political action committees supporting Donald Trump's campaign for president. They outlined their reasoning for backing Trump in a video podcast episode that was posted yesterday that runs more than 90 minutes. Here's one of the highlights.
The first topic is the blockchain and crypto, which is probably the area where we've had the most interaction with the government.
This has been a brutal assault on a nascent industry that I've never experienced before. I'm in total shock that it's happened. It's been intensely frustrating that it's been impossible to make progress in this with the White House. And it's just like, it's a totally intolerable situation.
Our old friend Reid Hoffman kind of wrote a defense of the Biden administration. He said, business people should endorse Joe Biden because, the most important thing to business is rule of law. And I thought, wow, that's so ironic because they've basically subverted the rule of law to attack the crypto industry. I mean, we're dealing with that right now. This is probably the most emotional topic.
Their support comes as other big names in the tech world have also thrown their support behind former President Trump, including Elon Musk.
And a big part of that interview, by the way, though, I think it wasn't just the regulation or lack of regulation for crypto, but was also around the idea of realized or unrealized gains, not as a wealth tax, but the way the White House has pitched effectively taxing what would turn out to be founders and private equity firms or venture capital firms. And so they've sort of, they went on a long, I don't know if you guys watched it, but that was a major component of the piece. Crypto was part of it, but the taxes and their own taxes and taxing startups and how that would work was something that was very frustrating to them.
You pick your poison. You want to list the things that normal business people wouldn't, right. But I'm not going to go into it because my horoscope today, you need to accept that there are some battles in life that can never be won. And one such battle is right there in front of you. Yeah. Now. Okay. In front of you now. Accept that it's not worth fighting over a lost cause. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of reasons.
I still can't
Jamie Dimon going
to
be Jamie Dimon going to be Treasury Secretary? I mean,
no.
So many disappointments for you, though.
He's not going to be Treasury Secretary.
That's good. Thank God.
Meantime, former President Trump speaking to Bloomberg Businessweek, where he even floated the idea that he liked Jamie Dimon enough to make him the Treasury Secretary. It's unclear whether Jamie Dimon likes him enough to become the Treasury Secretary. But the piece talks about what his economic policies would look like if he wins in the November election. He said he would allow Fed Chair Jay Powell to serve out his term, which runs through May of 2026. But he said the Fed should not cut rates before the November election and give the economy and President Biden a boost. He said he wants to bring the corporate tax rate to as low as 15%, and he no longer plans to ban TikTok. He also said he wants to bring down inflation by opening up the U.S. to more oil and gas drilling. And he said he would consider J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon to serve as Treasury Secretary, in part because he liked the comments that Dimon had made back in Davos in January.
I think people should be a little more respectful of our fellow citizens. And when you guys have people up here, you should always ask the why. Not like it's a binary thing. You're supporting Trump, you're not supporting Trump. Why are you supporting Trump?
It's hard to hate 75 million of your fellow Americans. And
I agree.
It's done crazy.
And, the Democrats have done a pretty good job with the deplorables, hugging onto their Bibles and their beer and their guns. I mean, really? Can we just stop that stuff and actually grow up and treat other people with respect and listen to them a little bit?
Meantime, I think the most interesting component of the conversation that he had around Jay Powell was the idea that he thought that he could fire Jay Powell. It's actually unclear legally whether he could fire Jay Powell, but the implication, if you really read the sentence and how he said it, wasn't just I'm going to let him, but it was I'm going to let him stay in this role as if he had a choice about letting him stay in this role. That role, at least as far as a whole bunch of scholars and lawyers and constitutionalists and others around the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve's independence is supposed to be.
That's more interesting. That's more interesting to you than he's saying cutting corporate rates to 15% when we had the individual yesterday who says he's basically putting together the plan for the Trump economy and the new neoliberalism, or whatever the hell that is.
Growth has gotten slower and slower. Wages have stagnated. And so, yes, people, conservatives, anyone who's paying attention is recognizing it's time to go a different direction.
Neopopulism is what he called it.
J.D. Vance being on the ticket means that that's going to be put forward. Then I saw Kevin Hassett yesterday said there's no way, shape, form you're ever going to have Donald Trump recommending an increase in the corporate. The most interesting thing to me isn't that Trump is clueless about what he can do with Powell. The most interesting thing is that he's saying 15%, not 20 now, saying 21 down to 15%. And actually in the Journal, interesting lead piece describing both the good and bad things about the Trump economy, what the tariffs took away from American consumers, but what some of the capital gain, what the corporate tax rate cut, what that did do for business investment, which had started going down in the final 2 years of the Biden administration, about real wages going up, A lot of positive things there that came from cutting corporate. Why would you raise corporate rates now? And
to deal with the deficit.
The guy,
the answer that would come back. I mean,
it's piddling.
But you're asking.
Corporate rates are 7% total.
No,
now.
but it's the implication of fairness and the pushback you get from.
Why is it fair to?
I said it's the implication.
Tax corporations.
Don't yell at me like this.
I'm not yelling.
You're asking
I'm not
why
yelling
I'm saying
at you.
these are the
I'm not
things
talking
that are
about Teddy
gonna come back.
Roosevelt or anything. I'm not yelling.
The National Parks and Teddy Roosevelt, yes.
Yeah.
Very near and dear to my heart.
I saw.
Did you see the Project 2025 two-bracket tax system?
I mean, that's not going to happen.
Well,
Project 2025.
If you believe it's not going to happen.
I believe it's not going to happen. Trump said that's not going to happen.
Certain parts of it are not going to happen, but when it comes to the tax piece of it, what was so interesting was that they were going to go to a two-bracket system, a 15 and 30% system, and effectively on individuals. Yeah. And what I thought was so fascinating about that actually was that if you made $100,000, your taxes went up remarkably, but if you were making a lot more than that, your taxes went down remarkably. And so I don't know how you feel about folks who are paying, who are making $100,000 or $200,000 and their taxes going up significantly, but people who are making $3, $4, $5 million, their taxes going down remarkably.
We can have another conversation about whether Trump's going to make him put himself on the Federal Reserve. I don't, why do we discuss things that he already said I'm not doing the Project 2025, so why talk about?
Do you believe that he's really not going to do all?
Yeah,
all
I really
of those
believe. I don't know which ones he's going to. I have no idea, especially with J.D. Vance as vice president.
That's why we're talking about all these
I have no idea. But he already said he's not. Maybe he's lying, so he doesn't worry people. At this point.
I don't know. Shares of Spirit Airlines, they are sharply lower this morning. Take a look at what's going on here, off about 6%, more than that now. Company warning that it would post a bigger loss than expected in the prior quarter, and that's because revenue fell short. Spirit saying non-ticket revenue, which accounts for the fees that it tacks on to its low-price fares, they came in several dollars lower than anticipated. That's per passenger. Now, the airline recently revamped the way it sells its tickets, bundling its fares with add-on fees for things like seat assignments and carry-on bags that it used to sell a la carte. The company says over time it'll be able to improve its total revenue per passenger using this new strategy. Everybody always felt like they were being nickel and dimed for the extras. Now they feel they're being nickel and dimed for the entire fee.
I wish they would just charge everybody to bring a bag if you're going to check it, or if you're going to, if you're going to charge us for checking bags, charge people for bringing them on the plane too, because it slows down the loading process, makes everything complicated.
And people are fanatic.
But that's what Spirit does.
Not going.
Yeah, but other United.
Oh, I see what you're
saying.
With
it.
But if you've been to Newark, there's a reason that under no circumstances would you ever want to check anything. Because it's sometimes as long as the flight, waiting for the bag, or it doesn't. But I'm just resigned to it. I got to check it. So I watch these people, and I have zippers in my suitcase. So I have like my charger, the things I need, I have in these little zippered pockets on my suitcase.
You don't have a single backpack.
I don't have a single thing when I go through. I don't carry anything.
It would be so much faster.
So I would never check a bag.
That's what I mean. But I always have golf clubs or something. I have
never check the bag.
I have to check a bag. But then that frees me up. Well, what if you have some type of liquid? I have hair products.
I see.
And those are liquids which you can't.
I get those little bottles.
You get the little bottles.
Little bottles.
I use a lot. of
This is my issue too. It's the makeup stuff and hair.
Okay, well.
So you know.
We don't have these problems in Teterboro, folks.
You don't, you're right. But the people that are just obsessed with the carry-on stuff, they drive me nuts because they hit you as they're going by and they're jamming it up into the thing. They drive me nuts. They wouldn't check a bag if their life depended on it.
It takes so much longer to board the plane as a result.
I know.
Okay, we got to go. High-end thing to do, by the way, send all the stuff in advance.
Ship sticks is a way to send clubs. You
can send skis. I've done that before.
Next on Squawk Pod, Marc Andreessen, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the biggest tech names to endorse Donald Trump. The Information founder Jessica Lessin explains the political shift in Silicon Valley.
We surveyed Information subscribers yesterday to get a slice of the tech community, and 59% said they plan to support Biden, 27% Trump.
She says it's movement toward Republican nominee President Trump, but they're only voting on a couple of key issues. More on those issues and why EV maker Musk is endorsing EV skeptics right after this. This is Squawk Pod.
Up and Andrew, Q.
You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC. I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin along with Joe Kernan and Becky Quick. Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, co-founders of the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, they are reportedly now planning significant donations to political action committees supporting the Trump campaign, adding to the list of Silicon Valley tech leaders who are pledging money to the former president. Joining us right now to talk about what is going on in the Valley, Jessica Lessin, the information editor-in-chief. Good morning to you. We've been talking all morning about the video that those two gentlemen put out on YouTube, but of course also David Sachs speaking now at the Republican National Convention this week, and it appears calls by Elon Musk to Donald Trump that may have even led to J.D. Vance's selection as VP. Speak to what seems like a major shift, or at least a visible one, in the Valley.
Absolutely, Andrew. There has been a sea change. We've gone from loud voices in the community speaking out on behalf of Biden to now those voices being quiet. And we're seeing all the people you named. The information broke yesterday, the news about Ben and Marc, who had been very critical of Trump at Andreessen Horowitz, openly endorsing him. I think these tech leaders say they're being moved by policy. They're being moved by Trump's support for crypto, for AI. But, there really is not perfect alignment between Trump and the tech community. The community's at odds on immigration, even EVs, which I think is a big question for Elon Musk, who's come out in front of Trump. So we've seen a sea change, but there are many, many open questions right now.
Well, so that was the question. How much of this is a sea change, and how many of these people do you think either were Republicans, closet Republicans, or other things before? You talked about folks who are not speaking out now. Is that because they are still planning to back Biden? Are they shifting to Trump? When you think about some of the big companies, and I'm talking about the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts, has the management of those firms shifted, or are we talking about sort of individual pockets?
I don't think there's signs that the management of the big firms have shifted. But I think a lot of people, like people across the country, are maybe hoping that President Biden does step aside. And so they're not out there openly endorsing him. I think the big companies are really quite conflicted. They are facing regulatory pressures from both sides. They have concerns about both sides. And we're not seeing those CEOs speak out, except, of course, for Elon Musk, who also controls the platform of the X. We surveyed information subscribers yesterday to get a slice of the tech community, and 59% said they plan to support Biden, 27% Trump. We'll keep doing those numbers to compare. That strikes me as some movement towards Trump for sure, but still the majority for Biden.
Jessica, can you explain sort of the disparity between Silicon Valley executives and maybe more mainstream Chamber of Commerce executives, just in general, with Democrats versus Republicans? And, I understand TDS and I understand Donald Trump has got some policies that don't fit into the normal business regimen that you would think of. But Silicon Valley, it doesn't matter who the Democrat is. I mean, they didn't back Romney, really. All along, they always are on the side of a party that some would view as less business friendly than Republican. Why is it like that? And that's why this is a sea change. And not only is it a Republican, but it's Trump.
I think the politics, Joe, are complicated in the Valley if you go back. I mean, way back, there was actually very Republican support in the origin of Silicon Valley. But there's no doubt in what I think of as the Google, Obama, Eric Schmidt, Clinton era. Yep. There were Sheryl Sandberg and so forth. You had a lot of strong Dem leaders around the Valley. And I think what's happening now is you see the folks like Andreessen, Thiel, Musk, they're sort of libertarian in many ways, right, but they're ignoring social issues where they may not agree with President Trump, but they're deciding to really vote based on a targeted set of issues that they care a lot about. I mean, AI and crypto, if you're talking about Andreessen Horowitz, that's how they're going to make or lose their money, those two issues. So I think it's very complicated, and it's hard to say if we're swinging red or blue. I mean, the Valley and these leaders are kind of somewhere in the middle on many different issues. I also think, though, perhaps what we're seeing is the sense that Trump is going to be in the White House again. And if that's the case, it would, I suppose, make sense for some of these leaders to try and get behind him. And so it's
Jessica,
hard to decouple that.
I was going to point out, it was right after the shooting that you saw some business leaders come out and immediately throw their support behind him. Maybe they were counting on the idea that would give him an even bigger bump, and thinking, okay, it's inevitable now. I want to make sure I get my chips on the table and get some credit for supporting him now.
Absolutely. I mean, Musk's endorsements was minutes, or, right in the thick of the assassination attempt.
He was close already, though. He's still mad about the EV meeting where Mary Barra, she sold like 3 cars and Elon wasn't there.
I mean, that's a huge, it's fascinating to me. I mean, Elon's business, his fortunes rise and fall on the future of Tesla. Trump and Vance have been very clear that they, think that EV subsidies shouldn't be in the cards. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah. Do you think that his thought about needing or wanting subsidies at this point, given the success of that company relative to the others, it basically makes it almost impossible for everybody else if they don't have the subsidies? Is that how you see this? Do you think you think it's a broader philosophical view?
I think it's I think Musk is being practical in some ways, but the EV question is not resolved. I mean, competition. I mean, many people think it's a race to the bottom with commoditization for that business. So I don't think he can be feeling confident in that regard, but perhaps he's thinking he can change his mind. That might be why he put his cards on the table.
And then the other big one this morning, Elon Musk saying he's leaving California. I think we might have known that sort of a little bit in the back of our heads, but officially over this new law around gender identity in the state. Do you think this is going to lead to other companies moving officially to places like Texas?
We've seen a trickle, and I think that will continue. I've got to say, Elon has a knack for timing these moves that probably took 5 years to the 5 minutes when there's a headline in the news. You don't move a rocket factory's headquarters overnight. It's hard to say, Andrew. I think we're seeing some of that. There's movement outside of California for sure. But these days, there's actually a lot of activity, especially startup activity back in the city. And I know many a venture capitalist who has decamped to Austin and come back. So I think we'll see in terms of the macro. But Elon's made it clear that he won't be in California. I think we were all expecting that.
Okay, Jessica Lessin, the information, it is awesome. You guys might have to move to Austin eventually, guys. I don't know.
We're everywhere.
Thank you. Appreciate it very, very much.
They're in the ether.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up, how the Federal Reserve is reading the rhetoric from our presidential candidates with former Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren.
If there's very significant tariffs, particularly if they're matched around the world, that would make it more difficult to achieve a 2% inflation target over the next year.
What's talk and what's actually walk? How fiscal policy could impact the Fed's decision on interest rates, which will impact you. Right after this break on Squawk Pod. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC with Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here's Becky.
President Biden has told some Democratic lawmakers that he plans to endorse significant changes to the Supreme Court. The plans under consideration include term limits for justices and establishing a binding code of ethics. Changing the structure of the Supreme Court would require Congress to make a new law, and that's very unlikely while the Republicans control the House. Not to mention that at this stage, they've basically said they're not going to take up any big new legislation until you get past the end of the year and into next year.
By the way, I think that an ethics code, super sensible.
Yeah.
The fact that there isn't one, shocking. Term limits, we've all been wanting term limits forever for Congress, for Senate. I think you'd want it for this. I think you'd want it irrespective of who's on it.
No, this is this is term limits, I think, based on age, that he's looked into some of it too.
Yeah.
It's just a little rich.
No, I know it's rich, but but I would love to see, and I'm asking Joe, given the sort of, you don't want term limits. 9
guys and gals and lifetime appointments. No, I like it exact.
And did you like that 5 years ago? I think you would have said that you wanted term limits before.
I didn't like it during the Earl Warren court. 5 years ago was fine. Maybe, but going back to Earl Warren, which you weren't even born. But
don't you think it would be reasonable for us to have term limits for everything? We've talked about that seems like a sensible thing for everything.
I like Chuck Grassley. Runs 5 miles a day. All right, let's get to Eric Rosengren, former Boston Fed president, now a visiting scholar with MIT's Golub Center. And Eric, we got some more numbers. Everything is headed, looks like, for at least a September cut. You say that the Fed should not cut. Why?
No, I actually think that the Fed probably should and probably will cut this September. So I think things are well aligned. Inflation has come down.
So you didn't say that he also said the Fed should not cut interest rates before the election. So you didn't say that. I'm sorry, I read it. I actually took out something else and didn't read, but I left that in and did read it. So anyway, never mind. But okay, then let me get to the next question. A quarter point. Does anything improve? Does that really do anything? I mean, it's a sign of a trend, obviously, and it's a sea change. But does it help people who want to buy a house? Does it help people who are getting a loan? Does it really do that much?
So as you know, 25 basis points isn't much of a change by itself. Normally, the Fed doesn't move in 25 basis point increments and then do nothing after that. So I think the market is telegraphing that they expect a series of cuts over the next year and a half. So the first cut is indicative of conditions that now more easing is likely. I would say the market is implying a steeper rate path cut over the next, through April than I personally would expect. The Fed's been pretty conservative in terms of wanting to be sure that they're well on their way to get to a 2% inflation target. And inflation's still a bit higher than their target. So using the Fed's preferred measure of core PCE, we're at 2.6%. So there's still a bit of a ways to go before we get to 2%. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what exactly the inflation outlook will be next year. There's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty. There's uncertainty about what fiscal actions will be. So I think the Fed's going to move pretty slowly. And I would expect at the press conference, the chair is going to highlight that they're still looking at the data at each meeting, and they're not going to really provide any forward guidance.
There is a political backdrop. Net, should the 10-year yield be headed higher because of the prospect of tariffs or the prospect of cutting tax rates that might be in a second Trump administration without cutting spending commensurately? Is there a sign that inflation will have a good chance of coming back if Trump becomes 47, not just 45?
So fiscal policy matters. So as you think about what the rate cuts may or may not be in 2025, it does depend on what kinds of fiscal actions you expect. So if there's very significant tariffs, particularly if they're matched around the world, that would make it more difficult to achieve a 2% inflation target over the next year. That might cause the Fed to be more reluctant to move aggressively until it gets a better sense of what exactly the tariff situation is. If you end up deporting a lot of individuals that are working in construction and service jobs, that could cause wages and salaries to not continue to go down, consistent with a 2% inflation target. So the Fed's going to want to see, to some extent, what actions, how much is rhetoric right now and how much are actions that are actually going to be taken. So I think a cautious approach, both because inflation's been coming down relatively gradually, but we've also had some false starts, and fiscal policy will matter. And if fiscal policy causes there to be an inflation shock, then the Fed needs to react with monetary policy to offset it.
Eric, curious to get your views about what former President Trump said about if he becomes the president as it relates to Jay Powell. Seemed to suggest that he would like to keep him in place until his term ends. But if you really were looking at some of the wording, there was an implication that if he didn't do what the president wanted, that maybe he would fire him early. There's obviously a big legal debate about the independence of the Fed and whether the president can do that.
Yeah, I have no idea about the legal implications. I think it's unlikely that there'd be much benefit to doing that, and there'd be no reason not to have him finish off his term. So my baseline forecast would be that that action wouldn't be all that supportive of what either president would probably want in order to achieve a soft landing for the economy.
We've sort of heard, Eric, anecdotally, Eric, that we've kidded about who would want that job, and I think we've heard that maybe the chairman's watching and he's like, exactly, or his wife, you know. So I mean, if someone said to me, you know, we don't want you anymore, really? If I were to, I mean, he's doing it for us. When you think about it, nobody needs this. How much does it pay? $10 million a year? What's it pay, Eric, to be Fed Chair?
$450,000. What is it, Eric? I don't know what the number is anymore. I think it was about 450, right? Maybe less.
No, it's less than 450.
Yeah.
No, you know who got 450? New York. If you're the chair in New York, you get more.
Really?
Right? Isn't that right, Eric? I think the chair in New York gets more than the actual chair in D.C.
That is correct.
Yeah, and you're still not going out to dinner every night in New York.
Brookings has a paper on what happens if Trump tries to fire the Fed Chair Jay Powell. There is some precedent that that the Supreme Court has taken up a case. The only time this has happened was when FDR actually fired someone who was at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, over policy differences. That was back in 1933. Humphrey, the guy this happened to, sued for reinstatement. He died while the litigation was pending, but the Supreme Court still took up the case, and the estate won. So they said you can't do that. The Supreme Court would have to decide whether the same logic applies to the chair of the Fed's Board of Governors. But that is the closest legal precedent there is for it.
Eric, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
And that's the pod for today. Thank you for listening. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
My horoscope today, you need to accept that there are some battles in life that can never be won. And one such battle is right there in front of you.
Yeah.
Now.
You can tune in weekday mornings on CNBC at 6 Eastern and get the best of our show when you follow Squawk Pod, this very podcast, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you like what you hear, let us know. Rate or review Squawk Pod on Apple Podcasts. That helps other listeners discover us. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.